This is our last Fishbowl of the semester. I hope people have enjoyed our contributions from fellow faculty members. And as our last presentation, we actually have a collaborative presentation between Chris Marshall and John Zavodny that are going to talk about the humanities' role in sustainability science. So, thank you.
I've been spending some time with this concept of sustainability science and trying to understand what it means, reading some things, talking to people, and I myself have not encountered what I think is a thoroughly enriched definition of sustainability science. So in true philosophical fashion, I did conceptual analysis, Socratic reasoning, a little bit of dialogue, and here's what I propose. I don't want to spend any time on this today. I do want to present it for possible discussion, but mostly I want it to be both provocative and also to set the stage for this very short presentation of the role of the humanities in sustainability science. So here's my definition as of 10 o'clock this morning. Sustainability science is problem-based, solutions-oriented, and epistemologically pluralistic inquiry into environmental concerns that result from and impact the purposeful, ideological, and ecological exchange between broader nature and human individuals, society, and/or culture. Thank you. Thank you. For my next performance. So the important concepts here, we've heard them all before, right? It's the interaction between nature and culture, or alternatively, nature and society. So I hear both of those things as the kind of interdisciplinary components of sustainability science. I think sustainability science has got to be defined as inquiry into environmental concerns. I think the concerns have to be environmental for it to count as sustainability science. Now, we might argue that all concerns are environmental, in which case all inquiry is sustainability science. I'll let you people argue that. Epistemologically pluralistic is my attempt to make sense of what transdisciplinary means, because what we've said so far is mostly transdisciplinary is kind of pointing to a problem in between different disciplines and then selectively using the tools and the concepts, techniques that are supplied by different disciplines. So I thought really what we're doing here is we're trying to get to some form of knowledge. We're trying to construct knowledge if you are a social constructionist. We are trying to discover knowledge if you are not. But whatever we're doing, it has to do with knowledge, and it is pluralistic in nature. I'm going to use this definition, and I'm going to poke at some of the themes that show up when you study what the humanities are good for. And there was, about a year ago, a very rich influx of people talking about what good are the humanities, largely because funding was challenged. So, on the right, you'll see some of the resources that I used. On the left, you'll see my summary of what I think people are saying the humanities are good for. The humanities are good for goal setting. In other words, helping us as a culture, as a society, as a species identify what our priorities might be. The humanities are good for memory and imagination, and that's looking backward, think history, and looking forward, think art and literature. The humanities are good for critical thinking, think philosophy. The humanities are good for redescription. I'll get to that more later. And then the humanities are good for, gasp, wisdom. The goal-setting function of the humanities can help clarify the tension created by the tug of problem and purpose. I like the idea or the metaphor of thinking of a high-tension line, right? We've got problems in our society. Some of them are environmental. And when you've got a problem, if you think of it as the tug of problem and purpose, you can think on one hand we have some circumstances that are facts about the world. On the other hand, we have our own purposes, our own goals, our own ideas of how we would like to live, for example. And those two things tug against each other. Our ideas of how the world ought to be come up against the stubborn, resilience of the way things are. Now, there are two ways of changing or reducing that tension, right? You can change the way things are, which is what we really, really try hard to do and which is stubbornly defiant. Or you can change the way you think about them, which is sometimes easier. The humanities are good for changing the way we think about the way things are, not just in order to be more happy to live with the way things are, but if we change our purpose, if we change what we want out of life, what we want out of ourselves, you can reduce that tension in other ways. Martha Nussbaum offers an example in the book Not for Profit where she suggests that we give up the purpose of economic growth at all costs. That instead of economic development, we reframe our purpose as a people into human development. And so we invest in the capacities and the abilities and the happiness and the flourishing of human beings. And all of a sudden you can imagine how, while some of those facts stay kind of stubbornly defiant on one end, if we change our goal from being economic development that's always pulling and creating tension, to human development, which costs much less in every respect, then all of a sudden we can be happier with the way things are. A flourishing economy requires the same skills that support citizenship, and thus the proponents of what I shall call education for economic growth have adopted an impoverished conception of what is required to meet their own goal. So Nussbaum argues not only that we should change our mentality about what our goal is, but also that if we did, oh, by the way, we would also achieve the other goal of economic growth. The critical thinking function of the humanities can help us analyze the concepts and values involved in sustainability science, in our human flourishing. It can also embolden individuals and social groups to take action against status quo, authority, and apathy. And this was one of my favorite themes that came out of my literature review, that the humanities are good for helping us think independently, for making us into critical thinkers, for making us into independently thoughtful individuals who are willing and able to stand up to the crowd and to stand up to authority. Nussbaum says, as we've seen, human beings are prone to be subservient to both authority and peer pressure. To prevent atrocities, we need to counteract these tendencies, producing a culture of individual dissent. The memory and imagination function of the humanities can help us understand how human, individual, social, and cultural behavior and performance create and value problems and help identify opportunities. Okay, I want to go back to this notion of identifying, but also creating problems. So when we think about what our goals are and where we want to get, we run into challenges, not because there's some teleologically predestined notion of where we need to get as a human species, but rather because we have decided that we want to get to a certain place within our culture, within our society, within our species, and we run into obstacles. Memory and imagination will help us, on the one hand, re-examine and learn the lessons from history about different cultures and the kinds of goals they set for themselves and the kinds of traps that might have led to. But also imagine a future where we have a different mindset, where we can apply different policies, where we pursue different results. So imagination in science. Richard J. Frank, among others, I just picked his version of this, says scientists provide us with the empirical data crucial to making informed policy decisions, but the data tells us nothing about the implications of our decisions. Similarly, Bill McKibben, in the introduction to I'm with the Bears, which I don't know, has anybody read that? It's an anthology that 350 put out in the fall, this past fall, as a fundraiser for 350. It's a bunch of short stories and chapters from novels that imagine a future, mostly dystopian. Bill McKibben says, the scientists have done their job. Now it's up to the rest of us, including the artists, whose role is to help us understand what things feel like. The humanities are good for redescription. The redescriptive function of the humanities can help change how values, problems, purposes, and possible futures are perceived and pursued. Nussbaum says, artists, unless they're thoroughly corrupted, are not the reliable servants of any ideology. They always ask the imagination to move beyond its usual confines, to see the world in different ways. And when I say see the world in different ways, I mean literally see the world in different ways. I mean, when artists do their work, when literature works on you, when poetry works on you, you can't help but see the world differently. You see different things in the landscape. You select different items for importance, and your world changes, and not just metaphorically. The wisdom function of the humanities helps us by acknowledging that there are subjects from which we cannot extricate ourselves. And Frank and others make a very strong point of this. I don't want to make too strong a point of it here at Unity College, where we value the sciences very highly. Frank says, put another way, sciences seek exact knowledge, whereas the humanities strive for wisdom. And in particular, the wisdom that Frank is talking about is the ability to look science kind of square in the eye and say, what are you good for? What aren't you good for? How is science grounded? Can science be considered to be just another, maybe a highly practical way of looking at the world, but one alongside many others, including, for example, art or sociology? Humanities people are going to ask that question and answer it in the affirmative. Science is a very, very, very practical way of looking at the world, but just one. And that's what I have for today.
Thank you.